Hi, this is Dennis Dalton, Safety Officer for Peterson Aero Club, and this is the safety meeting briefing for July 26th, 2022. Hot days, poor aircraft performance. Hot summer days is always a good time to discuss density altitude as an important consideration in aircraft flight planning. Last April 2021, the safety briefing centered on aircraft performance by discussing the then recent flight of Ingenuity, the NASA mini helicopter that pulled off the first powered controlled flight on another planet. The technical review of the factors that influence aircraft performance on takeoff was talked about there. That video is available on the club website. I talked about air molecules, how they affect prop, combustion, and propulsion, how barometric pressure is measured, how humidity affects air density, and I used the T41 performance charts. So, if you wanted to go into more detailed thing with that, you could look at that one from last year. This month's briefing focused on 2 accident cases and do a brief overview of what is density altitude, how it will affect my flight, and calculating density altitude. Density altitude can pose significant challenges in Colorado, which has the highest average elevation of any state and the highest average airport elevation. Every year, the state is among the top in the nation in density altitude related aviation accidents. Aspen, Colorado. This accident reports from an AOPA PowerPoint, which is a 45-minute lesson with a post-crash analysis. You can see the whole thing. Just type in AOPA density altitude if you would like to. I just pulled a few things from this to talk about how density altitude affects this type of flight. This one wasn't that long ago. This was last summer. In July 2021, 2 New York-based pilots prepared to depart Aspen, Colorado in a Beech Bonanza G36. One of the pilots had recently purchased a Bonanza in California, recently purchased, and the pair are flying it back to the East Coast. In order to depart Aspen, the 2 flatland pilots had to contend with high density altitude and reduction in aircraft performance that comes with it. Now, these descriptions of the pilots here are not mine. I might not have went so far as to say that. Maybe, but again, the AOPA lesson really goes into detail, which I am not in this case, but a recently purchased airplane, I believe, also factored into it. This one does have the NTSB evaluation report with it. And now it's 6:24 p.m. When the Bonanza departed, the pilot advised they will have to make a right turn following takeoff and request permission to climb up to altitude while circling over the airport. That's a common VFR departure to the east from Aspen. Has been manned for the last wherever. I remember doing that in the 70s. Pilot's reference to the southeast departure is referring to Independence Pass. Their plan was to cross the imposing Sawatch mountain range with peaks topping 14,000 feet, and yes, it is imposing if you're staring at it. The Bonanza makes its way up the valley. Its rate of climb is averaging, and you can't read it here, but it's 200 feet per minute less than the advertised performance level that the aircraft should have had. It says here about half the climb rate predicted by the operating handbook. I gotta quit putting my picture over here in the corner like that. Or well, I gotta move the type, is what I gotta do. Bonanza is approaching a semicircular mountain ridge line with tops over 13,000. Provides a route through the ridge here. Looks a lot like the one going into Leadville a little bit, doesn't it? I can't remember the name of that one. Through this ridge line at 11.8, but at this point the Bonanza's altitude is 10.7. To make it worse, the canyon is becoming narrower, and as the analysis from the AOPA, he was flying straight up the middle. which is not a good idea. As you well know, for your mountain flying experience, stay on one side or the other. And well, now time is running out. It's clear that the Bonanza won't clear the ridge line. Valley floor creeps up higher still, and the pilot makes a decision at 6:44 to abort, to turn around and escape back down the canyon, but it's too late. Unfortunately, a very typical scenario. This was a computer-generated image, and there's only about a couple seconds left out of this, and then they cut it off. The pass is way up here, and you know, and one thing they do mention, and I think it's true, is people look at the ridges of the mountains and don't realize how close the trees are getting, which in the next accident scenario is very true as well. The next one's very different. So this one, this is a well-known, I extrapolated this from a 4-minute video from 2012, if my memory serves correct, the previous safety officer, Joe Schmaltz, had showed this video in a safety meeting. Shortly after it happened, the NTSB analysis wasn't complete at that time. They're taking off in Idaho and so on, and they're on a dirt strip, and it's these trees over here. I just had to grab a couple off of the video here. So consequences of poor planning. Now, how did this happen? Well, the stills were taken from a video of the plane crash as it was experienced from the right seat inside the cockpit. Well, there's also somebody in the back seat who's doing the video of this thing. And that's what was so unusual, was exactly that. It's not a recreation. You know, I guess back then you could use YouTubes on the base if he did actually show this, because I think he did. I can embed this in the PowerPoint, but it'll only play, you know, with internet access. And I did actually, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. These guys are having a lot of fun, but you know, yikes. So on June 30th, 2012, a pilot flying a Stinson 108 crashed shortly after takeoff from Bruce Meadow Airport, U-63 in Idaho. According to the NTSB, before takeoff from the 5,000-foot turf dirt airstrip with a field elevation of 6,370 feet, MSL, the pilot checked his performance charts. He calculated that the density altitude was 9,200 feet. Okay, I'm going to use the same chart, and we're just going to go through here. Based on the takeoff chart here, the maximum field elevation for calculating takeoff is 6,000 feet. That's 370 lower than the actual field elevation. So while you're not supposed to extrapolate a chart for performance calculations, it's clear the pilot needed all of the 5,000-foot runway for takeoff in a no-wind situation, since it was 81 degrees at the time. So that's pushing it. 3 people in the plane. And worse yet, the pilot also noted that at the time of departure, the wind was from 030 at 10 knots with gusts of 20 knots. This was nearly direct tailwind for the takeoff from runway 23. In most light aircraft, takeoff distance increases by 10% for each 2 knots of tailwind. The takeoff run for this departure direction would have taken approximately 50% more distance with a sustained 10-knot tailwind, and this does not take gust factor into consideration. This image is about 30 seconds before the crash. So he was mushing along and the ground was getting higher and the trees were getting closer. And I think it looked like maybe at the last minute, but see the ground, well, you know, you can go watch this. It's pretty foreboding is what I would say. The 4 occupants survived the crash with the pilot. 4 occupants, I only saw 3 in there. Well, if there was 4, that's yikes. With the pilot suffering the worst injury, and I'll just say what the worst injury was, he had a broken jaw, and I have some tweets on here, but I didn't include that one, where one guy says, yeah, I bet you it was one of the passengers that gave him the broken jaw. So, okay. The pilot appears to have faced high-density altitude conditions which degrade an aircraft's takeoff and climb performance. These are a few of the online tweets in response to that video. And I think, to me, just real quick, it's very obvious. Of course, everybody knows that. I mean, at the, armchair quarterback thing, he flew a lot of open ground, which videos very obviously shows, without achieving positive rate. There was plenty of opportunity to put it down safely. There certainly appeared to be a number of places to put the airplane down before he reached the trees, which was true. Possibility is difficult to tell terrain accurately from the video. Yes, but if you watch the video, I would have turned before I got to those trees because nothing was happening. That thing barely got off the ground. What really concerned about this accident is that he had minutes of opportunity to abort and land safely without damage to persons or property, yet he decided to fly into the trees. A good pilot will exit a bad situation. An excellent pilot will avoid them. I was a CFI 10 years ago and always said to my students that sometimes a no is worth more than 100 hours of flight time. Knowing when to abort and dealing with delays of all sorts is as rich in lessons as flying. Yes. This video can be viewed on YouTube, and here it is. And yeah, since it has to come from the website, yes, if I'm running the PowerPoint and I click on it, it'll run. But when I make an MP4 out of this, it won't. It's going to give you one still, so I can't do that. So anyway, wonders of all this stuff. And just briefly, what is density altitude? If there's any non-pilots sitting out there. A density altitude is pressure altitude corrected for non-standard temperature. As temperature and altitude increase, air density decreases. In a sense, it's the altitude at which the airplane feels it's flying. Some planes, I can't recall. I think, of course, I don't know what those new Garmin things are you're going to be putting in the planes, if they will have anything similar to a density altitude calculation ring like I have on mine, which I have the old time steam gauge in mine. And I can't remember if one of those planes had, because I think one still has the steam gauges in it, if it had that calibration ring on it. But anyway, density altitude in feet equals pressure altitude in feet, which is setting your altimeter 2992, plus, if you happen to be in the airplane, 120 times the OAT, outside air temperature, which is what it says here in Celsius, minus the ISA temperature, which is standard temperature in degrees Celsius. A simple calculation, but keep in mind, standard temperature is 15 degrees C, but only at sea level. You take the mountain flying checkout and do that, all of this stuff is covered in there. It decreases about 2 degrees C for every, or 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit per 1,000 feet of altitude above sea level. Standard temperature at 7,000 feet, therefore, is only 1 degree C, or 34 degrees Fahrenheit. For example, density altitude in an airport 7,000 feet above sea level with a temperature of 18 degrees Celsius and a pressure altitude of 7,000 feet, assuming standard pressure, would be calculated as follows. 18 minus 1 equals 17. 17 times the 120 is 2040, and add that to the elevation to get 9,040 feet. Density altitude, the aircraft will perform as if it was at 9,040 feet. I have an iPad and on my this app here for density altitude, but it's only valuable if I apply it to my performance charts. For $3.99, it has a lot of information besides this screen. And my house, I live in Pueblo, so this Pueblo is pretty flat, but it's about 100. I think I can't remember Pueblo's official altitude at the airport. I'm west of that, up on the bluff there. So it looks like I'm 100 feet higher or something. But this is just on a regular old day. Of course, Pueblo is always hot, 92 degrees, So, geez, 8,000 foot density altitude just sitting there on the ground. You know, and you say, oh, Pueblo, that's not very high. It's not as high as Colorado Springs. Yeah, well, there's not much difference in that respect. The T-41, I just want to touch on the planes in the club a little bit. The T-41 has no back seat for various reasons. One of them, in my opinion, is to keep the weight down, which makes it safer. And of course, keep it in utility category operation as a trainer. But if you have full tanks, you're still light, you know, in passenger weight. Of course, the engine's heavier than what was originally in there. The T-41D gives you a constant speed prop, which is even better. The 172M can get you over gross weight with 4 seats, which is why it's not approved for mountain flight, although it could be flown in the mountains. Safety dictates otherwise for club aircraft. The 182s and twins demand that you use performance charts. The annual written tests required by the club are very valuable. You know, as a review, I did not address aircraft fuel mixture in this safety briefing, but the AOPA accident synopsis does for that Bonanza. You know, that Bonanza should have been able to eventually climb up to 13.5 and climbing at 200 feet a minute, 7 o'clock at night. It seems like they just bought the plane. They're from California. They live in New York. It's like nobody touches the mixture there, you know. Anyway, so those are some interesting things. So there you go. Be safe and vigilant, and that concludes the safety briefing for July 2022. This is Dennis Dalton, Safety Officer. Thanks.